and welcome to NewsClick. There has been a hashtag called Godhra Again on Twitter, which talks about killing 3,000 Muslims in Shamli district of Uttar Pradesh. We are going to discuss about the issue with documentary filmmaker Nakul Singh Sahni. He has been working on Muzaffarnagar and Shamli riots since 2013 and has recently released his documentary film called Muzaffarnagar Baki Hai or Muzaffarnagar Eventually. Hello Nakul. We have seen this hashtag called Godhra Again, which talks about killing 3,000 Muslims in Shamli. So what is the context of this hashtag, this entire tweet, it has been widely circulated in the Twitter and then later was withdrawn and then a case was filed against that person?
To understand this, I think we have to sort of step back a little and see it in a slightly larger context. First of all, what is the incident in itself? The incident of some people from the Tablighi Jamaat who were going to Muzaffarnagar, who got beaten up on the way in a train passing through Shamli and Muzaffarnagar. Now let's understand that this is something that's been happening repeatedly for at least 2 years now, especially before the massacre in September 2013 in Muzaffarnagar and Shamli districts. Say 6 to 7 months before that massacre, incidents of this kind have been happening repeatedly where, you know, if there are some Muslims in a train, and this often happens in this Delhi-Saharanpur train that passes through West UP, especially through the sugarcane belt of West UP. Now, what has often been happening is that there'll be a group of 6-7 people who identify people who are evidently Muslims. When I say evidently Muslims, I mean if they're sporting a beard or and wearing a skull cap and so on. There have been several such attacks, physical attacks on Muslims passing through these trains. There's been no police action against this. There's been no attempt at identifying the culprits. So, first of all, this is not an isolated incident. You know, there's been this kind of growing, compounding anger. The protest which happened was in a town called Kandala, which is a Muslim-dominated town in Shamli district. I mean, from what I hear from media reports, about 4,000 to 5,000 Muslims gathered on the railway at the railway station to block the railway tracks, to stop to do a rail roko kind of a form of protest. Now, let's first of all understand that rail roko, or this form of protest of stopping trains by blocking the railway tracks, is an age-old form of protest that all political parties have been doing, including the BJP when they were in opposition. They often turn violent. Now, I'm not justifying the violence, but the point is that the moment you see 5,000 Muslims doing it, doing this kind of a protest, you immediately begin to vilify them. You immediately begin to project it as something bigger than it actually is. Whereas you've seen these kind of protests all over, I mean, you've seen them all the time since India got independence, or probably even before that. This also needs to be seen in a slightly larger context, this attempt at vilification. You see, if you follow, and this is something that is there in my film as well, if you follow the headlines in several regional newspapers, say from before 6 to 7 months before the massacre broke out. So if there was a case of a Muslim man molesting a Hindu woman, it's funny how a lot of the regional media covered these incidents, and especially the headlines. The headlines would often be, would often say something like, you know, one man from a certain community molests a girl from another community or rapes a girl from another community. Then when we investigated and we realized that there were actually a lot more cases of Hindu men also molesting and raping Muslim women. And the point is, those were never reported like this. It would always be a case of molestation, or it would always be a case of rape that was reported. But the headlines were never one that pointed at a community, you know, as a whole. So that kind of vilification is something that we've been seeing for a while, and this is scary because if you look at the Sachar Committee report, you will realize that actually the Muslim community in this country is economically, politically more backward than any other community in this country, including the Dalits. Now, you are then actually picking on the weakest community and trying to project them as a threat. That is actually, I mean, it's very reminiscent of, say, of how African Americans were vilified in the US, and this whole image of the black rapist was projected. There's something very similar happening here, and that's very scary. It's a very scary trend. So this Godhra Again hashtag on Twitter or on Facebook, this is really a continuation of that. It has to be seen in this context of picking out a community. I mean, the fact that you, just because you have people in skull caps and with beards wearing white kurta pajamas, you suddenly begin to believe that any protest by people dressed in a certain way has to have a certain communal connotation to it.
When you talk about these incidents which have been happening in Uttar Pradesh specifically, we also need to see the political conditions in Uttar Pradesh. Samajwadi Party is in government, which has been oftenly called secular party by various, often called secular parties by various forces in the country, and they are taken as one among the front runners in taking the issue of communalism inside the parliament, outside the parliament. So, I mean, what is this all about? What has SP done to prevent it, or has it done also anything or not? And the other question is that in your film also you have talked about, and how it has been told in the news reports also, that the Muzaffarnagar Shamli riots, it was also a byproduct of a fake video that was distributed in WhatsApp. So, this increasing trend in social media is also something which is worrying, which is continuously attacking minority communities.
No, I completely agree with you. I think what we need to understand is that, first of all, while it is true that, and I think tweets of this kind which say that kill 3,000 Muslims, or this video that was circulated, the fake video that was circulated on WhatsApp in Muzaffarnagar and Shamli before the massacre broke out. Now, yes, action needs to be taken against people who are perpetrating this kind of, I mean, who are indulging in this kind of rumor mongering to vitiate the atmosphere. And I think the only answer to that is that sections of the secular, progressive, or left-leaning kind of activists, and even others, they need to start taking that social media very seriously themselves. About your first question, that's very true. I mean, about Samajwadi Party being in power. Now, if you look back, one of the things that needs to be highlighted is that ever since Akhilesh Yadav came to power, there were 200 small riots, small and big riots, before the 2013 massacre. And even after the May 2014 government, the BJP government came to power in the centre, in UP, according to a very extensive report in the Indian Express in August 2014, there have been some 600. This is actually, and this is in August 2014. So God alone knows how many more have happened after that. Now, the point is, and in a lot of these cases, when you begin to investigate them, you will realize that the local BJP, the local this and so on, the local RSS, the Sangh Parivar at one level is involved in them. But the point also is that even in this Rail Roko, the local SP MLA Nahid Hassan was very much there to instigate the crowd. Now, the point is that the SP isn't playing a particularly responsible role when it comes to stopping this kind of violence. They see a vested interest in this kind of polarization themselves. They want this polarization to build because they think that they're going to be able to consolidate the Muslim vote in the process when there is this kind of religious polarization. And it is this kind of very cynical, it is this kind of very opportunistic politics which sort of clears the path for a BJP RSS growth as well. I mean, there is this fear of the RSS among the minorities, and it's a very legitimate fear. And there is an anger against them as well. But that is all that the SP is being able to do, which is that whip up this fear against the RSS and get minority votes on the basis of that. However, I mean, if you look at the social indicators of Uttar Pradesh and social economic indicators, especially among the Muslim community in Uttar Pradesh, what has the SP government been able to achieve? Nothing. Nothing for the Muslims. So really, I think this kind of strategic secularism, I mean, that's a term I heard recently, which is strategic secularism, which I think describes parties like the SP very well. Which is that, you know, you use it you use it as a tool when it works for you, and you dump it when it doesn't work for you. And you see, even the kind of politics that, say, an Azam Khan is practicing in Rampur, this kind of politics is really, I mean, if that's how you plan to fight the BJP and the RSS, I am sorry, but you're not fighting them, you're just making them stronger.
Nakul, it would be my last question. Since the new government has come to power, the Prime Minister has been talking about being very media savvy, being very social media savvy, and he's been on Twitter, on Facebook, everywhere. But the continuous attacks on minorities have increased. When he goes outside, he preaches something else. So, what's the way ahead for progressive parties? What's the way ahead for the left parties who have not given any comment on such issues? And last thing would be, BSP is a major player in Uttar Pradesh. And when it's attack on minorities, we also need to see that there is a backlash against the Dalits also. So what role BSP has in all this entire movement?
I think it's a very good question. Your first question first, which is about the progressive forces in this country, and I mean, and you talk about the left parties as well, and there are progressive forces outside the mainstream left parties as well. But nonetheless, I think what's important is that I think We need to understand that while you're right, when the Prime Minister goes out, he speaks another language. When he's in another country, he'll talk about secularism and how India's secularism needs to be upheld and so on and so forth. But I mean, really what's happening on the ground is for everyone to see. One of their MPs makes a statement, some of the leaders make statements saying that Muslim rights, the voting rights for Muslims should be taken away. Others make speeches like Ramzada, Haramzada, and I mean, this is just happening endlessly. And at the same time, unfortunately, when you're saying there's no reaction from, say, the left parties, I think there have been just paper reactions, if you know what I mean. It's not really translated into anything substantial on the ground. And I think it's important to understand that parties like the SP, the JDU and so on, or RJD, and even the Congress, these are parties that have sort of practiced, like I said earlier, they've practiced a kind of strategic secularism, right? And I really think it is time then, when the second part of the answer actually comes from your second question, which is that finally, yes, communalism, I think, in this country is largely an extension of the Brahminical ideology, of the Manuvadi ideology. So in that sense, it's also very, very deeply anti-Dalit, and it's deeply anti-women as well. There is obviously the desperation to uphold the Brahminical order as well, and that is really what is at the core of the RSS. So if you have to fight, and I think this is where the BSP is also going wrong, because I think the BSP played a very important role under Kashiram and later even under Mayawati to some extent in organizing the Dalits and giving them a very strong political voice in Uttar Pradesh. But however, to then look at, I mean, on the one hand, if you're looking at secularism in isolation and not understanding how it's deeply linked to the battle for Dalit rights, to the struggle for Dalit rights, how it's deeply linked to the struggle for women's rights, how it's deeply linked to the battle against corporate greed. If these movements, if these struggles don't come together, I think we're fighting a losing battle. Looking at secularism as in isolation and just saying Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Isai, aapas mein sab bhai bhai, that's not enough. That's clearly not enough, and I think that's one mistake we've been making, is that we're looking at secularism as an isolated concept.
Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you, Pranjal.
Thank you for watching NewsClick.